I yield back.
Okay, I guess I'll call on myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Office of Refugee Resettlement. How many minors without parents do you know how many have been allowed in this country in the last 3 years?
Congressman, I don't have the precise number, but it's been over 100,000 over the last few years each year.
How many each year?
Over 100,000.
Every year. So every year in this country, we let 100,000 kids in without either parent, right?
We process these children and they come to our custody because they're unaccompanied children.
Okay. Do you know how many you are keeping track of right now, or how long you keep track of? If a 14-year-old shows up at the border, how long do we keep track of them?
So to clarify the way this works, if a child crosses the border, does not have an adult supervisor, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has 72 hours within which they must transfer that child into HHS's care because they're not equipped to handle children. We then will process the children, get all the information on the child. We then hold custody of that child as we work to find a sponsor who we vet, because by law, we're supposed to place that child in the most appropriate setting for children, and it's not in large congregate care. So we go through that process.
Percentage-wise, how many are going to another relative?
How many are going to a relative?
Yeah.
The vast majority.
Okay. Do we do DNA testing to make sure it's really a relative?
DNA testing is one of the tools we use to try to identify the individuals who are seeking to be
How
sponsored.
frequently, percentage-wise, do we do a DNA test?
It depends, because oftentimes we get some very credible information on the identity of both the child and the sponsor. And so if we need to do the confirmation, we'll go to something like DNA.
Do we know to this day where those kids are, whether they move on somewhere else? And even if it is a relative, say an uncle or whatever, do we do follow-up to see whether they're in an appropriate place?
Yeah, and as I tried to mention before, we have the records of the sponsors, and so we can reach out to the sponsors to find out about these children afterwards.
I think the New York Times once published something, and I don't quite believe their numbers, but
they're not correct.
A large number, I will believe that tens of thousands of children out of this country, and we don't know where they are or who's taking care of them. Is that true?
So people talk about them being lost. That's all inaccurate. Remember that they are placed with a sponsor. We no longer have jurisdiction to follow up with them. We try, because we think it's important, best interest of the children, we make an effort to try to contact both the child and the sponsor 3 different times.
No. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, 3 different times. And the number that you're citing from the New York Times is based on the fact that some of those children and sponsors don't respond to us. We don't have the authority to make them respond. They're not lost.
That's of interest, though. I guess I'm for keeping families together, okay? And I'm going to give you 2 more questions.
Yes.
Do you feel that if somebody comes here without a parent, 14-year-old or 15-year-old, why don't we at least try to turn them back to their country of origin? Is there any reason why we don't do that? If a 14-year-old kid shows up, my parents aren't here, well, we're going to look for a foster parent. Why don't we send them back home where maybe their parents can take care of them?
Congressman, that may be the end result. The difficulty
is... Well, maybe, but why isn't it the norm?
Well, I can't say it's not the norm. What I can tell you is it takes so long to process the case of that child in immigration court that it could be 4 or 5 years before we finally decide what the status of the child will be, whether the child stays or whether the child goes back. Oh. And so it's the fact that the process takes so long that leaves this child in limbo.
I'm going to go ahead. One more question.
Yeah.
Even if in our country, if there's a divorce or something, our court system tries to keep both parents in contact with the child.
Yes.
It bothers me that when a parent shows up with one child in this country, we can allow them in this country rather than saying, hey, wait a minute, you're here from whatever country, you're from Brazil. Why don't we wait and you see if you can come here with both parents? We're not going to take a parent and a child and leave the other parent in some other country. When we wouldn't allow that, maybe even for a parent to move to a different state. Why don't we, at least in that case, try to keep the families intact?
You have struck on the problem we have with a broken immigration system. We can't do that because everyone is entitled to a due process hearing, And because it takes forever to hold a hearing, we can't get to the point of adjudicating to what you just said. That's the difficulty when you have a broken system that doesn't let you process all these individuals, not just the kids, but the adults as well. It takes forever to finally get justice, whatever that justice might be. It may be going back to the home country.
Dr. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Becerra, for testifying before the committee today, and certainly I enjoyed having you in my district.